Okay, so welcome everyone to the final 2025 ATP Central Workshop. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our workshops can take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders throughout California. The workshop materials are located on our website at www.catc.ca.gov and is also posted in the webinar. Live closed captioning is available on this webinar. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document that the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For all of our workshops, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments throughout this workshop. We will stop periodically throughout to address stakeholder questions. For attendees on Zoom, you should see the webinar control panel likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raise hand and Q&A and chat tabs, and I'll make sure to enable the chat in just a minute. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it is your turn to make your comment. Once you have been unmuted, please make sure to state your name and agency that you are representing. Alternately, you may use the Q&A or chat tabs to submit your comments or questions, and commission staff will read those on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or phone number to access this webinar. These should not be shared with other participants as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise, and please make sure that your comments add new information. If you face any sort of technical issues throughout this workshop, please feel free to contact me through the Q&A or chat tab, and I will do my best to assist you. Thank you for joining us. So let me make sure that I'm enabling the chat for everyone. Okay. All right.
Okay.
And with that, oh yeah.
We're good?
Yep, we're good. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide.
Okay.
So the goals for today are to sorry, Lori, were these your slides?
It's okay. If you want to do them, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So the goals for today are to recap the application workshop, to discuss changes to the scoring rubrics, and go over any action items that we make note of throughout this workshop. For the program basics, the program is 4 years of funding, and for the 2025 ATP, this includes fiscal years 2025 through 26, 2026-27, 2027-28, and 2028-29. We anticipate approximately $568.7 million in funding. And so that will be distributed throughout each of the fiscal years as you see broken out on this slide. The 2025 ATP virtual site visits are still available each Tuesday and Thursday. We began these efforts in October of 2023, and they will continue through about mid-March of this year. Here is the link for the registration form. We ask that you complete this, and once you submit this to commission staff, we will then reach out and schedule your virtual site visit. I will say we are coming up on the last few weeks here, and we have only a few availabilities left. So if you are interested, please take advantage of this effort sooner rather than later. The final 2025 ATP schedule is as follows. The draft ATP guidelines were presented to the Commission at the January 2024 Commission meeting, along with the draft ATP fund estimate. We will hold a hearing and adopt the ATP guidelines along with the adoption of the ATP fund estimate at the March 2024 commission meeting. The call for projects will go out shortly after. The scoring rubrics we are anticipating posting no later than March 29th of 2024. And by May 10th of this year, the MPOs must submit their optional guidelines to the commission. The application deadline is June 17th of this year. And by the June 2024 commission meeting, we will approve or reject the MPO guidelines. By November of this year, we will post the staff recommendations for the statewide small urban and rural components along with the quick build projects. And we will adopt the statewide small urban and rural components along with the quick build projects by the December 2024 commission meeting. Any projects that were not programmed will be distributed to the large MPOs based on their location in December. And the draft project programming recommendations for the MPO component are due to the commission February 21st of 2025. And the final project programming recommendations are due April 22nd of 2025. We will post those MPO component recommendations by June, and we will adopt them at the June commission meeting. I'll pause here, excuse me, to see if there are any questions that have come in. Okay, not seeing any, I will go ahead and continue.
Want me to take? Okay, I will take over now. Thanks, Alika. Okay, so the first item on today's agenda is to do kind of a quick recap of our application workshop, which was in January. You can go to the next slide, please, Alika. Okay, so in that workshop, we focused mainly on application content, but we do have some updates on Submittable. So I'm sure most of you know by now, we're switching to a new platform for our application, which will house the application online with all of the resources there as well. So all of the application guidance and links to important materials. So we are expecting to have kind of a trial for everyone to check out by late February or early March. So you'll get a link and you'll be able to kind of just see what it looks like, see what the application looks like in there currently. And then we will be doing a workshop in collaboration with the Active Transportation Resource Center in late March. So we'll be going over the application and then talking about Submittable in that workshop and just kind of giving an overview of the platform as people are beginning to put together their applications. We don't have a specific date for that yet, but we will share that with the group whenever we have that date. So in terms of application content, the things we talked about in the last workshop, we didn't really propose any major changes. So we aligned some of the application and scoring rubric language, and you'll see some stuff like that today as well in the scoring rubric workshop, just making sure that the language is aligned in those two documents. Another change we made was removing direct references to COVID, and that's something that we will talk about again today. So specifically in the public participation and planning question, we had some specific prompts on COVID, on kind of impacts from COVID-19, and we've changed that now to something a little bit more general. We just say, you know, I forget the exact wording now, but just basically any circumstances that created challenges during engagement, such as COVID-19 or kind of ongoing impacts from natural disasters. So we'll have more of that today as we go through the scoring rubrics. And then probably the biggest change that we made at the last workshop was adding some new non-infrastructure prompts to the combination applications. So with Submittable, we're kind of able to separate out the applications a little bit more. So the combination infrastructure, non-infrastructure applications will have some more specific prompts on the non-infrastructure element of the project, and the kind of standalone infrastructure project, so with no non-infrastructure component, they'll no longer have any of the non-infrastructure prompts. And so that'll be another focus of today, is kind of making sure that those non-infrastructure prompts are kind of integrated into the scoring rubrics. And then at the last workshop, we talked about a new sub-question in the safety section, and we are going to present that today, kind of a draft of what we were thinking for that. So I will hand things over to Lori, who I think can give a brief recap of the background of why we're adding this question. And then kind of our proposal. So I will hand things over to Lori.
Okay, so we are adding a sub-question on the safety section where the applicant should discuss what kind of, why they chose a certain kind of bike facility. So whether that be class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and we're doing this for a reason that there was some concern from legislative staff that about the program funding class 3 or Sharrow's bike lanes, and so and because sometimes we do, and there's usually good reasons for that. It's usually because there's only room for class 3 in that particular area, or that's just the appropriate context. So, but because we want to be able to understand better why agencies are selecting certain facilities, and then we could give this data to legislative staff if they should need it. We are pulling this out specifically where applicants can discuss why they chose that type of bike facility. And we're thinking this will be good for the applicant too, because the prompt gives you a chance to discuss why it's the appropriate context. So hopefully it shouldn't be more work. It's just another opportunity to describe why you chose a certain kind of project. And then because it's a separate, we wanted to put it in a separate subsection, because then with a submittable, then we can pull that out if we just want to have that data if someone should need it. Are there any questions? Okay.
It looks like, Lori, we have one hand raised.
Okay.
Diego, you have been unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to ask on that question related to safety and the quality of the bike facility, will there be a, I guess from an evaluator's perspective, would there be a benefit if a jurisdiction were to say, look, we're going to go with a class 4 because it's a safety consideration, we're willing to balance the modes in that respect and possibly impact existing parking, over, say, a jurisdiction that would provide the justification that says, well, we couldn't get rid of parking and this is the best we can do when you're applying, like, say, a class 3 Sharrows, like on a 35-mile-an-hour roadway or higher. Now that DIB 94 is released via Caltrans, I think it has really some robust guidance in there on how and the types of facilities that should be applied. So I'm just curious on the evaluation front if there's going to be a benefit or a lean towards those with more robust applications. Thank you.
We're encouraging the best facility that the agency can build. So the problem with making it like, okay, you're going to get more points if you put in a class 1 or class 4 is that wouldn't be fair if you can't. Particularly if it's a network type project where there's certain sections that because of the way that the network is built, it has to be a class 3 or a class 2. So it won't be like you get this many points for class 1 or this many points for class 4. It's going to be more the quality of the how the applicant explained why they chose that type of facility. Does that answer your question, Diego?
It does, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Lori, can I just add to that really fast?
Mhm.
So you're going to go to the next slide, which shows like the question that we're asking, but we kind of pulled in things from DIB 94 with like the guidance that Caltrans is providing into that question. So, and that was with the help of our colleagues at Caltrans that we pulled that in. So I just wanted to add some more context.
We have a couple more questions coming in. We have one from Nicole asking if the new platform that we're going to be using is Valid Eval. And Lori, just so that everyone knows, you responded to this, and the new platform that we'll be utilizing is Submittable. We got another comment, or excuse me, question that came in from Denise Sifford asking, at a previous workshop, we discussed where in the apps and scoring rubrics, the best place might be to ensure that the regional agencies providing NI Safe Routes to School support for smaller cities that cannot apply to the program themselves are not docked points for not identifying schools in the application up front. Was there any additional discussion on this at the last workshop or any related application fields identified? Denise, it might be helpful to have you come off mute and maybe talk more about this. So I've
Definitely.
gone ahead and unmuted you. Go ahead.
So, Alika, can we
Yeah.
ask that when people ask a question that they say who they're with?
Yep. Thank you, Lori. Yes, please identify the agency that you are representing.
Yep, this is Denise with OCTA.
Go ahead, Denise.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I just wanted to follow up on this conversation that we had started. I think it was at the PSRE workshop where we had a couple of experience with past applications where applications that were applying for either non-infrastructure or safe routes to school on a programmatic basis, like creating programs to support either like schools or smaller agencies that cannot apply to the ATP program individually, we're getting scored lower because schools that they're supporting are not identified in the application up front. And so since I know that I missed the last workshop, so I wanted to check back and see if there was anything that was identified, whether it was like fields in the application itself or something in the scoring that we could address, that we could use to address this.
I think I kind of remember this, but Ellie, you might need to come off mute and talk about this a little bit on why there needs to be a clear scope. It might take her a minute, probably caught her off guard there.
Oh, oops. No, that's my bad. I accidentally gave the wrong Allie permission. Go ahead, Allie.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think it is really helpful to have those partnerships identified up front in the application because that information is useful when completing your 25R, which is the scope of work that's submitted for all the non-infrastructure projects. Even if you're still, finalizing that coordination, but you've at least been in contact with the school and are working with them on the program. I think that's helpful. We know that sometimes there's changes in staffing that happens at the school, and there might be instances where you might need to work with another school, and that's totally fine. But I think what we really like to see is that you've made that attempt already in your application to form that partnership with the schools that you're going to be working with, because we know that takes time, and if you're doing that after being awarded, that's cutting into your ability to deliver the project. So that would be my response off the cuff. But if there's more information, I can definitely follow up with you.
Yeah, I think Denise, what you're saying is that sometimes you want to apply for non-infrastructure and there's this group of schools, but you're not sure exactly which ones are going to actually have the program at it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and in the
Okay.
past we've framed it as, this is a disadvantaged community jurisdiction, whichever framework you want to use, and saying, we'll provide services to the top 10 or the top 15 schools that are available for in their scheduling and programming. But it may be that the specific schools in that area may not have a confirmed partnership yet.
Okay. So I think we'd have to find the right balance between giving the agency the flexibility to conduct a program the way that they think is going to work best with having a defined enough scope, if that makes sense. And
Right.
just so everyone knows, that was Allie came off me. That's Allie Dorb Westbrook. She's with Caltrans. She's our non-infrastructure expert. So maybe that's something we could talk about. We could look at the scoring on that and see what it says.
Yeah, and I'll go back to and see if there's anything that we can pull from our prior applications that might be helpful for this too.
Okay. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks, Laurie.
Okay, we've gotten a couple other questions that have come in. We have one from, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Somaya, asking, could you please give more details regarding the virtual site visits? What would it entail and how might it help the agency with the application? So the virtual site visits are essentially very similar to an in-person site visit. And what these are discussions regarding the project or projects that you are thinking of proposing in the upcoming cycle. We ask that you provide maps or renditions of your project, and we basically talk through what it is that you're proposing. And this is really an opportunity to have one-on-one time with commission staff to talk through any questions that you may have regarding the application or the competitiveness of your project. And then we really, talk through everything that you're proposing and provide feedback. So we have seen significant success with agencies that take us up on this opportunity. And I would recommend anyone who isn't aware to take a look at the previous engagement summaries or engagement reports that we have posted on our website. So the registration link is also provided on our website, and all you'll need to do is complete that form. And once you submit it, I'll reach out to you and schedule some time. Again, we're only offering these to about mid-May, and I would say that there's less than 10 slots left. So if that is something that you're interested in, please make sure to submit your request sooner. We got another question, Lori, asking, this is from Olivia, asking, can jurisdictions and agencies joint apply for a project? For example, a city and a county co-apply for a fringe area that's mixed incorporated and unincorporated.
Yes, but there does need to be one implementer though. But yeah, they can co-apply.
Great. It looks like we addressed all of the questions.
Okay, Beverly, am I still up on the bike facility?
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, there's the
Okay, so
proposed question.
Okay, so this is how we're proposing that this question is laid out. That, so first you ask, and it's a checkbox, does the project propose a new or improved bike facilities? And then if yes, describe the issues that were considered when evaluating and selecting the project's bikeway facility type. This may include discussions of, and then it has all of these things. So I think these are really good prompts for the agency to talk about why they picked that particular facility. So we talked about this and worked on this list a little bit, but if anybody has any other prompts on here that we should include, we'd be happy to hear that. I'll give it a minute so people can read this and think about it.
We have one hand raised.
Okay.
Francie, go ahead.
Thanks. Is there going to be a box under other considerations if we want to just give you a couple of words of explanation about what those are?
So Beverly, how is this actually going to look, do you think?
This will be a narrative question. So actually, I think our proposed word count here is something like 300 words. And so you'll be able to touch on any of these that you want to touch on, like anything that you've actually considered. So you can, for other considerations, you can talk about those in the narrative.
Great.
These were
Thanks.
just some like prompts and ideas to give people to think about as they were responding to this question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Actually, that the surrounding land use types, that's not bad. That might be a good addition. Thank you, Derek.
I'll make sure to add that to our list of action items.
Okay.
I'm not seeing other hands raised or comments come in.
Okay. Then we should probably move on then. And if somebody thinks about something, we can always go back to this or put it in the chat.
So yeah, we actually will be going back to this later today because we'll be talking about how this will be scored as part of the scoring rubric discussion. So if you think of anything else in that time, someone said roadway classification, we can always come back to it when we get to that section of the scoring rubric. Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so we're going to kind of go, as we go through the scoring rubric changes, we're going to go through like the sections of the applications and the sections of the rubrics. So we'll start with disadvantaged communities, and we'll go through kind of all the different applications or all the different scoring rubrics for that section. Because a lot of the changes that we're making are really similar across each of the scoring rubrics, or a lot of the changes that we're proposing. So next slide, please. Okay, so we will be updating the median household income DAC severity points table. And so this is based on the 2018 to 2022 American Communities Survey, median household income for California. And this was in our guidelines. So this is basically the same format and kind of the same structure as what we've done every cycle, just like the same thresholds for each point level. It's just updating the dollar amounts to reflect the new median household income. So the new median household income in California based on this data set is $91,905, and 80% of that, which is our threshold, is $73,524. So it's pretty straightforward, but I will pause and see if there are any questions about this.
We've actually gotten a lot of suggestions on the previous slide.
Oh, great.
So I'm making note of those. I'll give it another minute to see if there's any related to this particular slide.
Yeah, and I'm like looking through these suggestions right now. So even if we don't end up putting all of them kind of in the like application question, we can definitely add these as examples in the scoring rubric, because if you're an applicant, we always like you to look at the scoring rubric as you're preparing your application, and we like to include examples in there, just so you have some ideas of different things you could be talking about in that for that question.
I'm not seeing any questions, comments, or hands raised come in regarding this slide.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so as we presented a few workshops ago, we'll be adding the 2 new federal Justice 40 tools as state disadvantaged community qualifiers. So we'll be kind of added to the menu of things that you could choose from to qualify as a disadvantaged community. And we presented how we would score them at a previous workshop. I think it was in maybe November or October. But we said we'd bring them back to this workshop just to kind of refresh everyone on what we're proposing to do here. So the first tool is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. And this tool basically measures some different categories. So it looks at climate change impacts, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and workforce development, and then also has kind of a tribal overlap and a neighboring disadvantaged community category. And it basically has like a threshold for each category, and if that census tract is disadvantaged, it's kind of a yes or no under each category. So for this, it's a little bit different than the other tools that we've used in the past. So things like CalEnviroScreen, like CalEnviroScreen has a score. Healthy Places Index has a percentile, but this didn't really have those. So what we're proposing to do is to kind of count the number of categories that a community qualifies as disadvantaged under, and then that would kind of determine the severity score. And so just like we do with the other categories, we kind of do a weighted average of all of the census tracts in your project. So we would kind of, if you're doing a 2 census tract project with 2 census tracts, then one qualifies under 5 categories, and then one qualifies under 3 categories. We would do a weighted average of 5 and 3 based on the population of each census tract to come to kind of your score, and then you would get points based on that score. So that's kind of the outline on the screen of how, what the thresholds are for each number of points. There are 10 total categories. So in order to qualify for 4 points, you would need to get a weighted average of all of your census tracts that is 7 or greater. Olivia is asking why we chose Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool over CalEnviroScreen. We didn't choose Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool over CalEnviroScreen. CalEnviroScreen is still a disadvantaged community qualifier. So they'll still be able to choose that. We have several different qualifiers that you can choose from when you're applying. And the reason that we are adding the 2 new federal tools is because they capture some things that our state tools don't necessarily capture as well. One being historic underinvestment based on redlining, which is something that we really wanted to capture. Hopefully that answers your question, Olivia. Have the weights for each category been shared? I'm not sure what that means. We're not weighting any one category more than another. We're basically just taking all of the different disadvantaged community qualifiers that they're saying they're looking at, and we're counting them. When I say weighted average, I'm talking about the population of like each census tract. And maybe that's where the confusion is. So like if you qualify as a disadvantaged community under climate change and under housing, like each of those are weighted the same. It's more if you're applying with 2 census tracts, we would like look at the population of each of those census tracts to come to your final score. So if, you know, one has 4,000 people and one has 1,000 people, the one with 4,000 people would be like weighted more when the form is like calculating your final score.
It looks like Denise has her hand raised. So Denise, go ahead if you want to elaborate on your question.
Yeah, this all sounds a little bit complicated. So maybe, I guess based off of what you said, does that mean that you're only going to be looking at one tract to base the severity score off of?
No. I actually had at a previous workshop kind of an overview of how this would work, and maybe it would be helpful to bring that up again. Alika, are there any other questions on this? I'm going to pull up another slide.
We have another hand raised.
Sure.
Also, please, Denise and others, please, can you share what agency you're with? Thank you.
And hi, Olivia Seidman. I'm with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We're a community-based organization that works with rural communities. And I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand this. So when you say you can choose CEJST or CalEnviroScreen, so are those kind of like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand, since with CEJST it has these additional points. And so is there a similar point system for CalEnviroScreen, or is it that you can use CalEnviroScreen, or are they used like in like concert with each other, if that makes sense?
So you can only choose one tool. So we have several different ways to qualify. So an agency, when they're applying, they have to choose one. So they can choose median household income. They can choose CalEnviroScreen. They can choose Healthy Places Index. They can choose the National School Lunch Program or their free and reduced price school meals. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. And they can choose the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and they'll also be able to choose the Equitable Transportation Community Explorer, which I'll go over in a few minutes. We also have a regional definition option and a tribal lands option. And the tribal lands option, the community automatically gets full points. So they choose which one works best for them. Sorry, Lori, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a little bit of context that the disadvantaged community criteria has been established and revised over, this is our 7th cycle, and we just added these 2 federal tools this cycle because of Justice 40. But the other tools, we've been using those over the cycles, and they've been refined through stakeholder input over the past 6 cycles.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, that's helpful. And so when an applicant goes to apply, we always tell them to try every tool and see which one best reflects the burdens that their community is facing. And then for each of those, there is a table that has the scores. It's basically like the severity points they would receive for each range. So yes, for CalEnviroScreen, there is a table like this where they get a certain number of points for their CalEnviroScreen score. So does that answer your question, Olivia?
Yes, thank you. And sorry if that was jumping ahead, if you were going to share the tables for the other ones as well.
So we weren't planning on sharing the CalEnviroScreen tables because they're not changing from last cycle, but we could always pull up the scoring rubrics from last cycle to show you what those look like in a few minutes. So we were only showing the ones that are kind of changing this cycle, but it'll be easy enough for us to pull those up at some point. Okay. Sorry, I've been like trying to find as I'm talking. I'm not the best at multitasking, so Alika,
Yes.
is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes.
And I'm really sorry. Okay. I'm
No, no,
also
no.
not in my normal setup. I'm in the office, not in my home office. And so I look like I don't know how to use a computer. I'm really sorry, everyone. Okay.
You
It
should
says that
be able to share now.
okay. It says it's disabled.
Oh, that's probably on my end. Let me see if I can change that. Okay, you should be able to now.
Yay, it works.
Okay.
Thanks, Alika.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Oh, and share. Okay. Can you see an old slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this was presented at our October 31st workshop. We talked about the climate and economic justice screening tool over, I think, 2 different workshops, and we presented all of this information. I can go through it again. So this is kind of an overview of the tool. Oh, sorry, guys. So it's a national tool. So the tools that we've used in the past are state tools, except of course for median household income. And then in this tool, a tract must be one disadvantaged community indicator threshold in order to be classified as disadvantaged. So these are the different disadvantaged community identifiers in the tool, and they have to meet the threshold for at least one of these in order to be disadvantaged. So they could meet the threshold for multiple of these and be disadvantaged, or they could only meet one and they would still be considered disadvantaged. So, and I have it at the bottom, no ranking. So, you know, in some of our state tools, that things are ranked. So, or there's like scores that show like who's more disadvantaged than someone else. But there's no ranking in this tool. It's basically they can qualify under 0 categories, 1 category, or several. And this is what I just showed on the screen. I think I actually literally copied that slide over. But this was the example that I used during that workshop on October 31st. So this is like what the table that you would fill out in the application. So you would have your census tract number, and the census tract numbers that I use here are from like Alabama or something. I just like use random ones. So be your census tract number, just like you would for any other tool, the population of that census tract, and then how many DAC categories that census tract qualifies under. So this one qualified under 6 of these categories that I showed on this previous screen. So they qualified under maybe these like first 6 or something. And then this one qualified under 3 categories. And then as we go down the list, so what the application does, and it does this for all of the disadvantaged community identifiers, it calculates a weighted average. So it's calculating a weighted average of the number of categories that a community is qualifying under. But the weighted average is taking into account the population of each census tract. So the census tract on the bottom has the largest population. So this 3 would be weighted more heavily than this 5 with only 981 people in it. So when you do this calculation, the weighted average of the DAC categories is 3.81, and according to our little table, so if the weighted average is at least 3 and less than 5, the number of severity points is 2. Okay, so, and then like it's for the location score, it would be the same as how we've always done it. So every single one of these census tracts on the screen qualifies as a disadvantaged community. So the location score is 2 because it's fully located in a disadvantaged community. Denise, does that help at all?
Yeah, that is really, really helpful. So this will all be, and I'll introduce myself again, Denise, OCTA. This will all be automatically calculated in the application.
Yep, just like our disadvantaged communities table is automatically calculated now. It'll be an automatic calculation. It's just, yeah. So that's a good question, because for people who are new, no, you will not have to calculate the weighted average. It'll be done for you.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that.
That's a good clarifying question. I was like, yeah, of course it will be, but yeah, I realize there's new people here. So yeah, you don't have to like know how to calculate this. The application will do it for you. Okay, so thank you, Denise. I need to stop sharing my screen. It's gonna take me a second to get to the right monitor. There we go. Okay, Alika, you can be in charge again.
Perfect. Give me 1 second. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Can you see my screen where we left off?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. We have a couple other comments and questions that have come in. We have one from Lucy asking, some cities have various census tracts of historically disadvantaged communities, of which all utilize the projects. Is there a radius we will need to utilize? If so, why?
So, when you are putting together your disadvantaged communities table, you're supposed to include all census tracts that the project touches. So anything that, like, if the project goes through any census tract or like is on, basically touches a census tract, all of those census tracts need to be in your table, whether or not they're a disadvantaged community. So you need to include everything. You can include, so if you're claiming benefit to a disadvantaged community, you could technically include that census tract too, even if the project doesn't directly touch it. But really, like, what we're looking for is you to include all census tracts that the project touches.
Okay. We have another question that came in from Deborah asking, it would be great if you could post cycle 6 rubrics for all project types pending the release of all the new rubrics. I know I have some of them that I used, but not the large combo infrastructure plus non-infrastructure, or maybe she's missing where they're located. Did you want to address that one?
Yeah, all of the rubrics are currently posted on our website under cycle 6. So if you go to the CTC ATP page and there's like a little tab that says cycle 6. If you click on that, you'll see all the scoring rubrics. You may have to scroll down a little bit because I think our staff recommendations are posted. She says that looks, but they weren't live. That's weird because I used them yesterday, but we can look into that and make sure. For some reason, sometimes they like take things down and say that like ADA, like being updated for ADA compliance. So we'll make sure that they're all still posted. I used them yesterday when I was working on stuff for this workshop, so they should be there. Caltrans also has them posted on their ATP website. I believe they still have them posted anyway. So yeah.
Can you see the website that I'm sharing currently? Okay.
Yeah, I hope it still works.
Okay, so this is the cycle 6 tab. They should be able to work. Yep, I'm showing that they're working. So if they're not working for you, it may be a firewall issue with your computer. I know there have been other agencies that have faced a similar issue, so I would recommend reaching out to your IT to see if maybe there's like a pop-up blocker or something that's taking place. But the links are live and they are available. And each of these rubrics is for the infrastructure only and the infrastructure with a non-infrastructure component.
Thanks, Alika.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so another tool that is a Justice 40 tool that we will be adding is the USDOT Equitable Transportation Community Explorer. So this one is also a national tool, but they do have state results, which is what we'll be using. So the national results compare like all census tracts in the country to each other. So California doesn't do quite as well under the national results, but they also have state results. So that compares kind of census tracts on like a statewide basis. So it's comparing California census tracts to other California census tracts. So this tool measures transportation insecurity, climate and disaster risk burden, environmental burden, health vulnerability, and social vulnerability. And then everything kind of, after it calculates all of this, it spits out a final index score. So this is pretty similar to some of the state tools that we already use in the way that it's kind of formatted. So we will, like, basically there's a final index score that comes from this tool, and we'll be using those thresholds to determine the severity points for like each project. So the thresholds that we're using are actually the same thresholds that we use for CalEnviroScreen and Healthy Places Index. So the 10% most disadvantaged get the most points, and then if they're above the 25% most disadvantaged, they don't get any severity points. So it's a pretty familiar structure to what we've already kind of used with our state tools, but I'm happy to answer any questions about this. And I still have my slides up from the October 31st workshop, so I could bring those up again if there's any confusion about how this will work.
I'll give it another minute to see if anything comes in. Not seeing anything come in or hands raised.
Okay. Alika, can you go to the next slide? And hopefully, do you still have your internet still, like your web browser still up? Because I think it'd be helpful, since Olivia asked about the CalEnviroScreen and the other tables, it might be helpful to just bring those up. So for CalEnviroScreen, Healthy Places Index, and the National School Lunch Program, we're not making any changes to the tables because we're not changing, well, CalEnviroScreen and Healthy Places Index, we're not changing the data set at all.
Yes, I have it up right here.
You're the best, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so for CalEnviroScreen, you can see that the structure is really similar to what I just presented for the USDOT Equitable Transportation Community Explorer. So CalEnviroScreen spits out a score for each census tract, and so we have like the threshold, so the 10% most disadvantaged, which the score is basically above 51.98, you get 4 points, and then if you're above the 25% most disadvantaged, which is a score of less than 40.05, you get 0 points. And then it's really similar. So if you scroll down a little bit, I'll come back to the free or reduced lunches. For Healthy Places Index, this is the same, like you're looking at the percentile. So if you're less than a 10th percentile, then you get the 4 points. If you're above the 25 percentile, you get 0 points. And there's a note on there that says that you should be using the overall HPI score. That's because HPI, when you if you've never used it before, when you go, you go on the map, it gives you a percentile for all the different indicators it measures. And it measures some really useful things that you can definitely use in your application, like in your narrative. It looks at things like car ownership. And yeah, so it's a great tool to use. Highly recommend that you take a look at that. I see Laura has a question, but I'll come back to that in a second. So if you scroll up a little bit, Alika. So again, for free or reduced lunches or the National School Lunch Program, we're using the same the same structure, so the same thresholds. We will be using a new data set though, and that is the 2022-2023 school year. That's the most recently available data set, and there will be a link to it in the application. And I know someone may ask this, like, why are we still using this if all students in California still currently get free school meals? We're still using it because all schools still have to collect this data as part of the National School Lunch Program, which kind of reimburses the California Universal Free Lunch Program. So all schools still have to collect it, and we feel it's still a good measure of student poverty in the project area. Okay, and then Laura asked, have there been any changes to the location score for docs? So no, we're not proposing any changes to the location scores. So for most applications, it's 2 points if it's fully located in a disadvantaged community, 1 point if it's partially located in a disadvantaged community, and then 0 if it's not located in a disadvantaged community. In the plan application, unfortunately, I don't know those thresholds off the top of my head because in the plan application, it's weighted more, but we're not making any we're not proposing any changes to those. So Denise from OCT is asking how we score severity for the regional definition. So for the regional definition, you can only earn up to 1 severity point, basically whether the community is disadvantaged or not. So we don't offer as many points for regional definitions, and it's kind of outlined in the scoring rubric. Actually, Alika, is it on this one? Yeah, I think it is on this one. Yeah, so it's 0 or 1 point for the regional definition. So basically you would just have to provide a narrative on how the project qualifies under that regional definition. And then you would get the 1 point if it does qualify under the regional definition. Any other questions?
We have one that came in from Sophia from Green Dot asking, can we still use CDP or block groups to define median household income if the community is of a certain population?
Yeah, you can. So yeah, you can still, it's still in our guidelines and it'll be in the application too, but you'll be able to use, you'll be able to use the same ones as last cycle. I don't know what the exact language is in the guidelines, but it hasn't changed at all. So I can't recall what the thresholds are. I could look those up really fast. I had the guidelines up before the workshop and then I closed them, but I should have kept them up. Hold on a second. I can read it to you.
And while you do that, Beverly, Laura, to help address your question, I pulled up the location breakdown for plans. So that's what I'm currently showing on the screen. And as Beverly mentioned, that won't be changing going into cycle 7.
Thanks, Alika. Okay. So our instruction for median household income is less than 80% of the statewide median based on the most current census tract level data from the 2018 to 2022 ACS. Communities with a population of less than 15,000 may use data from the census block group level. Unincorporated communities may use census place level data, and then there's the link to the data portal and the guidelines. So hopefully that answers your question, Sophia. Okay, great. Okay, so I think we can go back to, all right, I think I covered all of this. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so some other changes. So this is for all scoring rubrics, and this is just to match what we put in the guidelines, in the application in the last workshop. We're just adding some additional instruction here, saying that all census tracts or schools, depending on what tool you're using, must be clearly labeled in your census tract map. And just as a reminder that, so the evaluators do look at the maps, but they don't actually score them. They're kind of looking at them in relation to your project, and it helps inform, it helps like kind of support what you're writing in your narrative, so they kind of know where it's connecting to and where the census tracts are in relation to the project. But so they'll be looking at them, but commission staff does the severity and location scoring, and we really need your census tracts labeled in your maps, because we look at about 500 applications, and we spend a lot of time going and looking at our own census maps to figure out the tract numbers, because people aren't labeling them in their maps, and they're providing kind of incomplete tables for the disadvantaged community table. So this is just kind of a reminder we're adding to the scoring rubric to please label your census tracts to make it easier for us and honestly more accurate for you, because sometimes we just have to make our best guess if you're providing kind of an incomplete map or a map that's hard to read. So this will help make sure that your score is accurate for severity and location for your project. So I'm happy to take any questions about this.
We have one hand raised. Francie, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Again, please make sure to introduce yourself and the agency you are representing.
Thanks. I'm Francie. I'm with Los Angeles Neighborhood Initiative. And my question is, do the census tracts need to be marked on every map? Because I am worried actually just about a lot of lines on a map, making it harder to read rather than easier. Can we provide a map that shows census tracts and then a different map that shows, you know, bicycle lanes and sidewalks and all the other stuff that we want to show on the map?
Yeah, so for sure. So we ask for a lot of maps in the application, and you don't need to label the census tracts on every map. And even on this question, you could provide multiple maps here. So you could do just what you're saying. You could, provide a map with all the census tract labels, and then you can provide another map that has maybe more like focusing on key destinations in relation to the facility. So for this map, there's just a couple things that are really important. Like the map that I'm specifically talking about here, we need to see where the census tracts are, and we need to see the outline of the project, like the project location. That's really what's critical here, because this is really how we're scoring severity and location. And again, like we go back and we do the research if a map is incomplete, but you definitely know your census tracts and your project outline better than we do. So, we're going to make like our best guess on what census tracts are which. So yeah, and I think that's a great question, Francie, because that's something that we talk about in our virtual site visits and our application debriefs, you can attach more than one map, like, and for any of the map fields. So if you're trying to show like different things in different maps, attach more than one. So it might be helpful. Yeah, like it might be helpful to kind of to make it more readable, to kind of display different things on different maps. But yeah, we definitely need a map that has census tracts and the project outline. Okay, any other questions on this?
Not seeing any other questions come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so in the last workshop, we added some prompts about non-infrastructure for the combination application. So for this slide, what we're proposing to do is to make sure that the question in the scoring rubric matches the questions in the application. So really, this is just, there's like a section of the scoring rubric that kind of outlines what the questions are, the questions that are asked. And this is just adding that new language from the application to the scoring rubric to make sure that they're both aligned. So any questions about this?
Not seeing any questions or hands raised.
Okay. We can go to the next slide. This is the same thing. Oh, sorry. Okay, there's two different changes on this slide. Okay, so the first change is again a change to align with the application. So currently the way that the question is phrased in the scoring rubric isn't exactly the same as how it's phrased in the application. Specifically, it doesn't, it just says an important community need. It doesn't say an important disadvantaged community need or a need of the disadvantaged community. So we're just changing the phrasing here to make sure that the application and the scoring rubric align. And so it's very clear that people should be talking about their disadvantaged community here and not just basic community needs. And then the other change on this slide is similar to what was shown on the previous screen. And sorry, this is for the medium and large scoring rubric. So for the medium and large scoring rubrics, we'll be adding like that same new prompt about non-infrastructure events and programs, targeting towards the disadvantaged community. So I will pause and see if there are any questions.
Give it another few seconds here. Nope, not seeing any questions or comments come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Actually, we just got one question from Lucy asking, will they score higher if it combines infrastructure and non-infrastructure?
So, no, like it, well, I don't want to say no. So not necessarily. So you'll see how it's kind of laid out in the scoring rubrics. So it's still worth the same amount of points. So what we've seen in the past is that a non-infrastructure element can really enhance an infrastructure project and can make it an overall like a better application if that non-infrastructure element is really well thought out and kind of incorporated into the application well. I will say that adding a non-infrastructure program can also really hurt your application if it's not well thought out, if it's just kind of like an add-on where, you know, we're trying to get extra points. So so generally, like we're funding kind of in proportion to what's submitted to us. So like the same proportion of like combination applications that are submitted to us as we're like in our overall funding, it's kind of like the same level. So it's not like any one application is doing better than another. But yeah, it can enhance your project if it's done well. And we'll go over the scoring for that in a second, so you'll see it in the scoring rubric. Any other questions?
Not seeing anything else.
Okay, so excuse me. So now we're going to move to, in the disadvantaged communities score section of the scoring rubrics, there are always special instructions and expectations for evaluators. So this is really where we're providing notes for the evaluators and for applicants to make sure that they're kind of thinking about different things as they're looking at their response or writing their response. So we're adding some new language to these special instructions. Specifically on the combined projects. So our proposed language here is for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects. Applicants should explain how non-infrastructure events and programs will be targeted towards the disadvantaged community. This should include discussions of strategies that will be used to ensure that the non-infrastructure programming is easily accessible to the disadvantaged community and relevant to their needs. And then there's some examples here of things that they could talk about in their response. But not necessarily all inclusive of what they could talk about. Elika, before I take questions on this, can you actually go to the next slide? Excuse me. So this is the same thing, but it's for the medium and large scoring rubrics, and it's just laid out a little bit different because it's kind of in a different location in those two applications. But it's essentially the same content that we're proposing to add to all three scoring rubrics. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this.
I'll give it another minute. Not seeing anything come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so in the scoring rubrics, we have tables that kind of outline how many points the evaluator should give the question or the response, like based on, you know, certain things that the applicant talks about or the amount of detail they provide. So we're adding, so this is basically in the small scoring rubric, it basically, it goes down. I only put like the first level on here, but it goes down 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. But they all have kind of the same language. So the language that we're adding is for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, how the non-infrastructure events and programs will be targeted towards the disadvantaged communities. So this will be replicated like for the whole scoring rubric, basically. When I created this, I actually, Elika, I'm sorry, could you actually pull up the scoring rubric? Because I just want to make sure people understand when I say like it'll be replicated for the whole scoring rubric. Okay, so this is actually a different application type, but it kind of shows you that, oh yeah, this is for large infrastructure. So it shows you like basically how our scoring rubrics are structured. So you get like the top most points if you clearly discuss like the different topics, and then it kind of goes down from there. So if like it's not as clear, if you're missing some information, you'd get fewer and fewer points. So basically, when I say we would like kind of replicate that language across the whole table, it's just kind of adding that language to each of these categories. So anyway, okay, I will stop there and see if there are any questions. Okay,
Not seeing any.
all right, we can go to the next slide. And then Alika actually just had the large scoring rubric up. So the medium and large scoring rubrics look a little bit different than the small scoring rubric, but essentially we're adding the same language to the medium and large scoring rubric. It just looks a little different because it's laid out a little bit different in those two applications. And I will pause and see if there are any questions about this.
I don't see any questions come in or hands raised. Oh, actually, we just got one from Eileen asking for the questions that rely on census data. Can we bring in other metrics regarding disadvantaged besides census? We have mixed communities.
I think I know the answer to your question, Eileen, but actually it may be helpful if maybe you can come on and you can explain a little bit more about your question because I want to make sure I'm understanding your question thoroughly.
Eileen, I've just unmuted you. Go ahead.
Okay, we have a project that spans a pretty long, linear corridor, and it passes through some census tracts that include, because of the uses, because of the zoning, it includes some populations that are not, much higher income bracket, but I would say, most of the project does hit those census tracts that are going to get us the points that, really point to the, previously, underserved communities. So, it seems like if there was a way for us to explain the population that's going to receive the benefits, would that help offset the how the census tracts are drawn? Because we don't have any control over that.
Okay, so what you're saying, so like hypothetically, you have a project that's pretty long and it's traveling through several census tracts, and some are disadvantaged, but some aren't, and maybe they're a little bit higher income, like wealthier neighborhoods. Is that kind of what you're asking, like how to deal with that?
Yes, that's right. Because when we just look at it from the mathematical standpoint and where the linear corridor passes through, then unfortunately our numbers get bumped up because of one particular wealthier section.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of the nature of that section of the disadvantaged communities question. But keep in mind that there are basically three parts to the disadvantaged communities question. There's severity and location, so that's part 1 and 2. And those two parts, it's like purely like mathematical, unfortunately. It's fortunately or unfortunately. It's by formula. So you would have to take into account, those other census tracts if your project is passing through that. But then there's the direct benefit question, and you can receive up to 4 points there. So even if you're scoring like less in those first two sections, if you're only getting it's only partially located, so you're only getting 1 point for location, and then, maybe it brings your severity score down to 2, you can still earn up to 4 points in the direct benefit question, which is the narrative portion of the application where you can really talk about those communities and their need and really focus in on the needs in those communities. And so hopefully that answers your question. This is kind of the part of the application that's a little bit more quantitative focused, but there is still that qualitative piece where you can really tell the story of your communities and their needs.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I don't see any other hands raised or questions come in.
Okay, we can go to the next question. Okay, so moving on to the next section of the application. So that kind of closes out the disadvantaged communities section. So the next section is the potential to increase walking and biking question, or the need question. And so again, we'll kind of go through that section and all the different scoring rubrics where we're proposing changes. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this section, we're only proposing the changes related to that kind of non-infrastructure combination piece. So in the scoring rubric, where it outlines what the question is for the small, medium, and large scoring rubrics, we're proposing to add basically the same language that we added to the application, just to make sure it's all consistent. So it's describe the non-infrastructure program, the population it will serve, and how the program will use education and encouragement to address the needs identified in Part A. So this is kind of adding to the Part B section where the applicant is talking about how the needs identified in Part A will be addressed by the project. So I will pause and see if there are any questions about this.
We have one unrelated question that came in asking if this workshop will be available through a recording. And yes, the workshop presentation along with the recording will both be posted on the Commission's ATP website under the Cycle 7 tab. I assume by latest end of next week.
Thanks, Alika.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm not seeing any other questions come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, in the scoring rubrics, we have a section that's called Special Instructions and Expectations for Evaluators. And this is again what evaluators are looking at when they're reviewing and evaluating the response that the applicant provided. So we wanted to add some more detail on that non-infrastructure piece for combination applications. So we are proposing to add for combined I&I projects or infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, evaluators should evaluate how the non-infrastructure programming will address the needs identified in Part A. Applicants should discuss how the non-infrastructure program will provide new skills and familiarity to the community, induce mode shift, enhance connectivity, mobility, and health, introduce the community to existing and new improvement. So I will pause and see if there are any questions. And this is again the small, medium, and large scoring rubrics that are all getting the same language.
Not seeing any questions or comments come in.
Okay. We can go to the next slide.
Oops, sorry, we have one that came in from Greg asking for combined I and I. Are you also looking for weaving in the DAC characteristics to how the NI portion benefits them?
So that's a great question. So we did, this is the second question, which isn't specifically focusing on the DAC. So we did add an I&I or an NI prompt to the disadvantaged communities question. And this is kind of a separate prompt. However, this is just something to always remember. If your project is benefiting a disadvantaged community, you should be talking about that disadvantaged community throughout your entire application. So like every prompt that you kind of have, you should be thinking about like how will this affect the DAC, and you should be integrating that into your answer. So we don't specifically list that here, but if the project does benefit a DAC, there's instruction in the scoring rubric that basically talks about how they should be talking about the disadvantaged community in their response. Hopefully that answers your question.
We had another one come in from Cindy asking, can you give an example of new skills?
Yeah, so maybe it's a non-infrastructure program. Like one of my favorite non-infrastructure program types that we fund are like bike rodeos, where they basically have like a little I don't know, like obstacle course set up for kids, and kids learn like new bike skills as they go through. So they learn how like to ride their bike, how to like, you know, like maybe deal with certain issues. There's also things like, I think they're like mock cities where you like have like kids riding through, and there's like, you know, a crosswalk drawn, and they like stop at that crosswalk, or a stop sign and they stop there, and they just kind of like learn how to navigate places on a bike. So things like that. There's also, you know, maybe it's targeted at adults. So maybe it's I always like, whenever I respond to questions like this, I always talk about like bike skills, because that's what I'm passionate about, but obviously you can learn like pedestrian skills too. But like one thing I think about is there are like urban cycling classes for adults, like basically learning how to deal with traffic, how to navigate traffic. So maybe that's like one of the things that you're offering as part of your non-infrastructure programming. Hopefully that answers your question. I think like there's also some really good resources. I have to give a plug to the Active Transportation Resource Center. They have some really good resources on like non-infrastructure programming, and they house some like project profiles of different non-infrastructure things we've funded. So definitely check that out for more information on non-infrastructure. And Allie is raising her hand, so let's move over. Allie is our non-infrastructure expert, and I should have called on her anyway at the beginning. She probably could give a more eloquent response than I can to this question.
No, you were great, Beverly. I was just going to add, with the ATRC, we can also provide technical assistance. So if you want to talk with our team about any ideas you have, we'd be happy to set up a call with you. So I'll put that in the chat on how you can request technical assistance. But we have a great partnership with the California Department of Public Health, who also has a ton of ideas that they can share with everybody. So yeah, I loved your ideas. We've also seen through previously ATP non-infrastructure projects doing like safe routes for seniors, helping folks, you know, access, you know, their local grocery stores and doctor's appointments by walking or taking transit. So those are some additional ideas. But like I said, I'll put information in the chat on how to contact us if you'd like any support for Cycle 7.
Thanks, Allie. Those are great examples. Yeah, definitely reach out to their team for some help on non-infrastructure ideas. Okay, any other questions?
Not seeing any other questions come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is again kind of a score table that shows how many points they would receive for different you know, levels of responses. So this is for the small, medium, and large scoring rubrics. They all have the same language currently. They're all kind of scored the same, but they do have different point ranges, which you can see on your screen on the points column. So for the small, this is worth 20 to 25 points. For the medium, it's 16 to 19 points. And for the large, it's 16 to 18 points. This is for like the highest level, like the best responses. So this is the language that we're proposing to add. It's that language in bold underline. So for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, implementing a non-infrastructure program that provides new skills and familiarity to the community. So I will pause and see if there are any questions on this.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide then. Okay, so the next section is the safety question. We can go to the next slide, Alika. Okay, so this is where we're gonna talk about two things in this section. So we'll talk about the non-infrastructure prompts, and we're also going to talk about this new question that Lori gave an overview of earlier. Again, this is the section of the scoring rubric on the screen where we're really just outlining what the question is that the applicants are responding to. So we're proposing to add the 2 additional prompts here for Part B. So for projects proposing new or improved bikeways, describe the issues that were considered when evaluating selecting the project's bikeway facility type. And then for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, describe how the non-infrastructure encouragement and education programs address the safety issues identified in Part A. So again, those just kind of match the 2 new questions, and we're just making sure that everything matches in the scoring rubric and the application. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions on this.
I'll give it another minute. Not seeing anything come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so next is the special instructions and expectations for evaluators. And again, this is for all 3 small, medium, and large scoring rubrics. So we're adding 2 things to this, or proposing to add 2 things to this. So there's actually 2 slides. So this is the infrastructure, non-infrastructure language. So for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, evaluators should evaluate the extent to which the non-infrastructure program will address the safety concerns outlined in Part A by encouraging safe behaviors, educating users about safety hazards, and/or complementing infrastructure improvements. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions or comments on this.
Not seeing anything come in at this time.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, this is for that new question on new or improved bikeways. So for the special instructions and expectations for evaluators, we're proposing to add, for projects proposing new or improved bikeways, evaluators should evaluate the extent to which the applicant evaluated and selected appropriate bikeway types given the context of the project and any constraints the applicant faced. This can include, but is not limited to, and then there's kind of that list that we discussed earlier, and people provided a lot of really great ideas here. I don't remember all of them, but those are definitely things that we can add to this list of like different topics that people can address when they're talking about their kind of selection of their bikeway types. So I will pause and see if there are any questions here.
I have a list of all of the ones that were recommended earlier in this presentation, so I'll make sure to go through them when we discuss the action items.
Sounds good.
Other than that, I'm not seeing anything else come in.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, this is kind of the table where we show how many points should be given for different levels of responses. And so this is for all three scoring rubrics, small, medium, and large. And you can see the points are different for different project types. So it's 9 to 10 points total for the large scoring rubric, and then 11 to 13 for the medium and small scoring rubrics. So we'll be adding to this and across this whole table for all the different like tiers. Additionally, for projects with new or improved bicycle facilities, the applicant evaluated and selected appropriate bikeway types. And then for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, the proposed non-infrastructure programming will address the safety needs discussed in Part A by encouraging safe behaviors, educating users on safety hazards, and/or complementing infrastructure improvement. Any questions or comments on this?
Not seeing any questions or hands raised.
Okay, we can move on then. Okay, so public participation and planning. You can go to the next slide, Alika. Okay, so the main changes that we'll be talking about here are the removal of COVID-19 specific language, and then, which is what we did in the application, and then the addition of the new non-infrastructure prompts. So for this, this again is just kind of how the question is laid out in the scoring rubric and making sure that it aligns with what we have in the application. So we talk about kind of challenges. So we originally talked about challenges that applicants faced due to COVID-19, and they can address that in the application, but we still expect the same, that the engagement should still be appropriate for the magnitude and complexity of the project. So our proposed language here is kind of not specific to COVID-19. We are changing it to evaluators should consider strategies the applicants use to overcome unique community challenges. For example, recent natural disasters, continued impacts from COVID-19. When evaluating this question, however, the level of community engagement should still be appropriate for the magnitude and complexity of the project. So again, this is just kind of making it a little bit more open, not so much focused on COVID, and still allowing applicants to talk about any unique challenges that they've faced. I'm happy to answer any questions about this.
We have one that came in from Jonathan Matt stating, thanks for the new language around I and I. I know I was delinquent in getting you some proposed language, other work and personal matters got in the way. Chime in. Oh, okay. Thank you, Jonathan. He said that he'd like to chime in by raising his hand, but he's lost his voice. So thank you, Jonathan, for letting us know.
I hope you feel better, Jonathan.
Yeah, I hope you feel better.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, this is actually how the questions are laid out. So that first slide was more like instructions for evaluators when it comes to COVID. So this is more like how the questions are actually laid out, and this matches what is being changed in the application. And so all of the application types or scoring rubric types are listed on here. So small, medium, and large. And then on the next slide, you'll see plan and non-infrastructure because we're doing similar changes. But basically just getting rid of a direct reference to COVID-19 and just asking if applicable, applicants can talk about any unique engagement challenges that the community faced and how they were addressed. If you go to the next slide, Alika, it's basically the same thing. For non-infrastructure and plan, for plans, the community engagement section is a little bit different because they're talking about the community engagement they will do when developing their plan. So that question is phrased a little bit differently. It says, if applicable, describe any strategies you will use to address any unique engagement challenges you expect to arise. For example, challenges related to ongoing natural disaster or COVID-19 impacts. So I will pause and see if there are any questions. Again, this is just making sure that the questions in the scoring rubric align with the application.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions come in.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we have this whole list, and this isn't the whole list. There's like this whole list that we have of kind of what engagement should look like. So we provide examples of kind of what engagement is. So kind of we talk about how it's a two-way process where you're really incorporating the feedback that the community is providing. We talk about different types of partners that you should be working with when you're doing your engagement. And then we talk about different types of meetings and events. So we have like, you know, lists of like open houses, city council meetings, booths in the community and places where the community is, like farmers markets or other events, walk or bike audits. We have, you know, we have a list of like how meetings can be documented, how they can be made accessible. So we talked about public transportation and translation and interpretation services, childcare. So we have this whole list. We're not proposing any changes to that except for, last cycle we were kind of at the height of the pandemic and we added a few things. So we added virtual meetings as like as a type of meeting. So we're keeping virtual in there. We're kind of keeping references to, you know, virtual meetings or virtual participation lists or virtual comments at meetings. And we're also adding in the word hybrid because we know a lot of communities have kind of moved to a hybrid format after, you know, the height of the pandemic. And so we'll be keeping basically all references to virtual participation options and these new tools. So we also added a bullet that said other methods to use to engage and obtain input from the community, such as crowdsourcing maps and surveys. So we're keeping that in there. We're just removing the specific language about COVID. We know that, you know, communities have continued to use these methods to obtain input from the from the residents. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions about this.
Not seeing any questions or comments come in.
Okay. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so now that's kind of all of the COVID-related changes that we're making, and now we're moving on to those non-infrastructure prompts. So again, we are making sure that the questions in the scoring rubrics align with the questions being asked in the application. So this is a small scoring rubric. It kind of the public participation and planning question in the small application is basically one question and one text box. So there's lots of different kind of prompts as part of that question. So this is how it's being laid out here. So for combined I&I projects, describe any public input on the development of the encouragement and education programming. And then if you go to the next slide, after I go through the 3 different applications, I'll pause for questions. So don't worry, I'm not forgetting about that. So in the medium application, the medium application for this question is divided into 2 parts. So we're adding this to part B in the application. So again, we're just matching what we put in the application for part B. So for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, describe any public input on the development of the encouragement and education programming. And then if we go to the next slide, please. And the large application, I think, is broken into 5 different parts. And this is part C of that question. We're adding the same language to that. So for combined I&I projects, describe any public input on the development and of the encouragement and education programming. Okay, so I'll pause there to see if there are any questions about that.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so adding this to the different scoring tables and the scoring rubrics, and all the 3 small, medium, and large are all laid out a little bit differently. So I'll have 3 different slides here, but it's essentially adding the same language here. So for the small, for the overall score, for combined I&I projects, public input was considered in the development of the non-infrastructure encouragement and education programming. Go to the next slide, please. Medium, it's the same language. You'll see that the maximum points is fewer than what was in the small. And again, that's because this question is divided into 2 different parts with different prompts. But it's the same language that we're proposing to add. And then large scoring rubric, if you go to the next slide, Alika. Again, fewer points available here because this is broken down into even more parts, but it's the same language, just asking whether public input was considered in the development of the non-infrastructure programming. Okay, so I will pause and see if there are any questions on this.
Not seeing anything come in.
Okay. We can go on to the next slide, which I think is a new section. Yeah. All right. Context sensitivity and innovation. So this question is in the medium and large applications only. Next slide, please. So the change that we're adding here, again, this is for the question. That's making sure it's the same as the question being asked in the application. So this is for part B, which is on innovative project elements, and we're adding combined I&I projects should address both infrastructure and non-infrastructure elements or any elements of the non-infrastructure program, innovative or new to the region. So that's kind of the question that's being asked in the application, and just making sure that's the same. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions. This.
Not seeing any questions or hands raised.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. And then this is the scoring table. So we're adding this new prompt to each tier, and it'll be Additionally, for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, the applicant had included and were considered innovative elements in the non-infrastructure programming. And I will pause and see if there are any questions or comments on this.
Not seeing anything come in.
Okay. We can move on to the next slide. All right, so the transformative projects question. So this is only in the large infrastructure application. And we did add a new non-infrastructure prompt to that question for the combined projects. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is part A of that question. There's the whole prompt asking about how the project will transform the non-motorized environment. And we're, to make sure that aligns with the application, we are going to add for combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, discuss how the non-infrastructure education and encouragement program will be transformative. And I'll see if there's any questions or comments on that.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions come in.
Okay, you can go to the next slide. And then again, this is just a scoring table. So for combined I&I projects, the non-infrastructure program will contribute to the transformative nature of the project. So that's the new language we're adding there. Happy to answer any questions on this.
I don't see any questions at this time.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, leveraging. We can go to the next slide, Alika. All right, so for leveraging, we're not proposing to make any changes about how this is scored. We'd like to fix an error that's in the leveraging table though. It currently, currently how it's laid out, if you have exactly 10% of your total project cost as leveraging, you don't actually fall into any of the point ranges because of a typo in the table. So we'll be removing the words less than, so it's for 2 points, it's more than 5% to 10% of the total project cost. We'll see if there's any questions or comments on that.
Not seeing any hands raised or questions come in.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So there are some notes in the scoring rubric about attaching a signed letter of commitment. We are adding a note here to align with what was put in the guidelines. Applicants without a signed letter of commitment will not receive leveraging points. Again, that matches what was put in the guidelines. And there will also be a field specifically for a letter of commitment in the application that'll be like a required attachment field. So hopefully no one will be able to miss it now because it'll be required. And there will be an optional field where you can attach anything else you want to attach about leveraging. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
We have one hand raised. Francie, go ahead.
Thanks, Francie with Los Angeles Neighborhood Initiative. So just that I'm clear, so a council resolution alone is not sufficient for leveraging points. You must have a letter of commitment, and a council resolution is just a bonus.
Yeah, you can add it as additional support. So there is some background on why we went with a letter of our letter of commitment. We were receiving such differing things from everyone. Like we would, get like an accounting spreadsheet from some applicants. We were getting a council resolution from others. Getting like meeting minutes from some applicants. And it was really, so more background on this before I finish that thought. So commission staff actually scores leveraging. We don't actually leave it up to the evaluators to score it. So we score leveraging for all of the, almost 500 applications that we usually receive. And it was really, really hard for us to be getting kind of different formats from everyone. To really actually see what was happening, like what they were proposing, making sure that everything was kind of eligible sources. So we decided to go with just like the signed letter of commitment. So everyone's submitting the same thing, making it kind of easier on us to review these. And we went through this with the stakeholders in the lead up to cycle 6. And this is kind of what we agreed on with the stakeholders. Because we could have done a council resolution, but council resolution may be harder for some applicants to obtain, before they actually get the funding for the project. So maybe they're not able to get that council resolution until, after the project has been awarded, which is something that we've heard from our applicants, which is why we kind of went with this letter of commitment as kind of something that everyone could provide. That's kind of standard.
Francie, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see I was still unmuted. So I'm in Los Angeles. Can I talk offline with one of you guys after the webinar at some point about, I'm just, a signed letter of commitment can come from a lot of different places in the city of Los Angeles. So, just want to make sure that we're providing you with what you want. And also, I hear what you're saying that for some proposers that might be easier to get. I actually think for us that might be harder to get. So I just want to make sure that we're providing what you're looking for.
Yep, we can definitely talk offline with you
Okay.
about it. Someone asked if we have a template. We don't, but I feel like that's something we could kind of throw together as what we're looking for this, which might be helpful. I don't think it would be too hard for us to provide something like that for people to look at.
Okay. So we have one from Carla asking, do you need it signed from someone specifically?
Yeah, so it should be someone that has like the authority to sign it, which can mean something different in every in every agency, but it's the kind of the same language we use for whoever's signing the application, like someone given the authority to sign by the governing body. So that might be like the public works director or, the director of the department that is, I know like City of Los Angeles just as an example, they have multiple different departments that are submitting applications to us. So maybe it's the director of that department that needs to sign it. Or it could be like the city manager. In like a really small community, it might be like the city manager is the best person to sign it.
Okay, we got a similar question from Eileen, and she was looking for similar clarification, and she was asking if the budget director or CFO is okay. So it sounds like based on their region, whoever has that authority is okay to sign off.
Yep, I would say those people would be fine to sign it.
Okay. Kyle Wong agreed that having a template for the letter of commitment would be helpful. So I've included that as one of our action items. We have one question from Tracy asking, again, something similar, who would be recommended to sign off on that. And so Tracy, I think we provided a couple of examples. If you have any further questions, you can always reach out to us. And we have one final question from John. Lori, did you want to add anything before I move on?
Yeah. Just one issue with the template, and that's, what if someone doesn't follow the template?
So Lori, what I'm thinking is we provide an example, but not necessarily a template, like an example that people could follow if they want to, but we're not going to like hold people to it. That's my thought on it. I don't think I would actually call it a template. People are welcome to use it as a template, but we would call it an example. I don't know, Lori, if you have thoughts on that.
Okay.
So, and just like as some more background, similar to the disadvantaged communities question, like I said before, the three of us, just the three of us, are looking at every single application and scoring, leveraging, and disadvantaged community severity and location. There's only three of us. So what we're trying to do is make it easy for us and make it easy enough for you to provide us with accurate information so we can give you the correct score. If the information you're providing us is unclear, we may not be able to provide you with the correct score. I mean, we try really hard to correctly score everything, but we need you to submit things that are really clear so we don't, I will say, we've done a lot of digging in the past. Lori in particular has called applicants to have them clarify their leveraging documentation. And I say applicants, I mean many, many, many applicants. Like, we try to give you guys as much help as we can, but we really are just trying to get materials that are as clear as possible to save us time, because we have to get through about 500 applications in a very, very short period of time. I think Allie's raising her hand.
Yep. Allie, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alika. I was just going to flag for you all the Caltrans Sustainable Communities Transportation Planning Grants. Within their guidelines, they talk about letters of support and have some really helpful tips within there. So, Beverly, if you haven't already looked at those, that might be an existing grant program that we might be able to pull some information from. But
yeah, that's great. Thanks,
I'll put a link to that in the chat. It has like helpful tips and individuals that you might want to seek a letter from. Yeah, I think a template would be challenging because you really want to show, like, you want to talk about your own project. So every project is different. And just if everyone was submitting the same letter, I don't think it would show the uniqueness of the project that you're applying for. So anywho, I'll put a link in the chat for folks who might not have seen that, and you could consider including in this program.
Thanks, Allie. Sorry, Allie, just to clarify, we're talking about the leveraging letter of commitment right now. For letters of support, which is
sorry
you're talking. No, it's okay. Because I think that whatever you provide is going to be really helpful, because I think you made a really good point. When we talk about, we do ask for letters of support in our application, and we do get this question like, well, what should it include? And I think Allie's she's going to provide maybe some examples from the Caltrans Planning Grant Program. And I mean, we have plenty of examples from our successful applications on our website, but I think Allie's statement of like every project is unique and every community is unique is really helpful when you're thinking about letters of support for your application.
We have one final comment that came in, and this one is from John stating, I know it's been covered over several meetings, but regarding the leveraging points, rural areas still seem to be at a disadvantage. when potential projects fall within the medium category. It's very rare that rurals can receive points there, especially in very competitive cycles.
Yeah, so we covered that topic pretty extensively. I think we focused on it in 2 workshops earlier in the guidelines development process, and we had a pretty extensive conversation with everyone and discussion with everyone about whether or not we should change the leveraging scoring. And the overwhelming majority of people participating in those calls didn't think that we should change anything. And that's not to say we're not going to consider it this cycle, but you know, that topic comes up every cycle. So I imagine for cycle 8, it'll come up again and we can discuss it again there. And I don't know, Lori, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, so the rules are not, they're somewhat split on this. So I actually did a lot of outreach to rural agencies on what they thought of this, and generally the rural agencies wanted to keep the leverage points.
Thanks, Lori.
I am not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we wanted to show everyone the QuickBuild scoring rubric, which will also be posted on our website. So just as some background, for the QuickBuild projects, we, for the last couple of cycles where we've had QuickBuilds, it's actually only been commission staff scoring them. We haven't included any other evaluators because they're so new, and we wanted to make sure everything was, you know, like a really good fit for the program. And we're obviously still learning about QuickBuilds, and I think a lot of the revisions that we made to the QuickBuilds this cycle and the guidelines will help us learn more, but I imagine we'll continue to learn more and kind of continue to revise those based on what happens this cycle. So the QuickBuild scoring rubric is pretty simple. It basically just like outlines, you know, what we're looking for and the different questions. And like how much each question or area, like issue area, is worth. So Alika, if you could go to the next slide. So this is kind of what we use internally when we score the QuickBuilds and the points associated with each section. So we look at need and safety, and we look at, for need and safety, we're looking at benefits to people walking and biking, and we look at benefits to students, older adults, and disadvantaged communities. And then look at whether it will address an urgent safety need. We also look at community engagement and interagency support. So we look at past community engagement, and then also the planned community engagement for kind of testing the project. And then different partnerships with like key groups, or key agencies. We look at project flexibility, so can the project be adjusted based on community feedback? We look at performance metrics, so how the QuickBuilds project progress and performance will be measured. If there's potential for a permanent project, the funding strategy, so a long-term funding strategy for a permanent project in place, and then a maintenance strategy, so basically how the project will be maintained. QuickBuilds are a little bit different. And then project readiness, so basically how quickly the project can be implemented in the community. Definitely not as much detail on this scoring rubric as there is with our other types of projects. And kind of once we kind of look more at QuickBuilds and kind of maybe go through this cycle and refine the guidelines more, we'll probably build this out more to be structured more like our other scoring rubrics, with kind of the actual point ranges and the different like more detailed level on you know, what applicants should be talking about. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions or comments on this.
We'll give it a few more seconds here. Not seeing any comments or hands raised. Oh, sorry, we just got one from Eileen that came in stating, yes, the relative scoring rubrics between the sections would be good to see.
Yeah, so that's probably not something that we will develop for cycle 7, but it's something we can start working on for cycle 8 for the quick builds. Getting more detail in because to be honest, we weren't sure whether we wanted to include quick builds again this cycle because we've, to be honest, have struggled with them. The 2 cycles that we've included with them, but we've heard a lot from our partners and from our applicants and from some of our commissioners that they really want us to keep trying. And, we see a lot of value in quick builds. We're just trying to get them right. So it'll just continue to evolve.
Eileen actually provided some clarification and she was saying not specific to the quick builds, but knowing that even 3 to 5 points makes a difference.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the workshop, but all of our scoring rubrics from last cycle are on our website right now, and we'll be posting, we're going to make these changes and we'll be posting the new scoring rubrics around the same time that the call for projects goes out, but you can look at the old ones right now and really get an idea of like the different scoring ranges and what the evaluators are looking at. And if you're starting to work on an application now, like starting to think through it, then that's a really great place to start. Start to kind of build out your responses to questions.
We have one question from Ben Matlaw asking how much money will be allocated to quick builds this cycle.
So we are dedicating up to $7 million this cycle. We may not use all of that money, or we may use it all depending on kind of what's submitted. So it's more of a cap rather than a set aside. So it's the same kind of amount that we've dedicated over, I think, both cycles 5 and cycle 6.
We have one final question that came in from Candace Vanderhyde asking, does a quick build have to lead to a permanent project, or can the quick build be the end result project?
Oh, that's a good question, Candace. And we added some language to our guidelines about this. So typically the quick builds that we're seeing, like they don't usually use like permanent materials, but they use some pretty durable materials. And we've heard from different communities that they're using materials that are pretty durable and they keep them in for kind of several years after the timeline of the project, because the community really likes the changes and the materials still work, and so it's kind of the most cost-effective thing to do. So we could see it staying in longer than like I think we say like 1 to 5 years. But I think like because they tend to use temporary materials, we would expect to see like, oh, if this works out, then like in the future we would use more permanent materials to kind of build out the project, if that makes sense.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions come in.
Okay.
Sorry, Candace followed up. Then what happens to the points related to that?
So, I mean, you can talk about your strategy, like if, oh, you can talk about like your strategy. So if you think like, I know we've talked to some cities where you know they've done like the maybe like painted curb extensions and they worked out really, really well and kind of just plan on keeping them there. I mean, you can talk about that in the application, like, you know, you've like based on experience, you know that these will work out. So this is kind of your overall strategy. I think as long as you're providing like a thorough response with like good reasoning, then we would still like score it appropriately. That's kind of how like the application is scored overall anyway. We're looking for really like like showing that you're thinking through your project and like what's going to happen with it. And so yeah, I think you could still get, you know, full points there as long as you're kind of explaining your strategy thoroughly.
All right. I believe, yep, that's it. I'm not seeing any other questions.
Okay, so I think those are all the changes we had to present to you all today. So we can open it up for any like general questions or comments or anything else that the group wants to talk about. I think, right, Alika? I don't even remember what's in this PowerPoint now. Oh yeah. Oh wait, that's a cute slide. Yeah, so we can open it up to kind of the group and see if there's any other topics that people want to talk about or ask about.
Okay, so we got one question from Susan Worley from Blias and Associates asking, I wanted to confirm from the PSR workshop slides that for the PSR and or equivalent, the application qualifies as the PSRE if it covers all of the required information. And will there be a checklist like the Caltrans Clean California application to show the application is equivalent? I know Desiree is on, so.
Yeah, we're going to create an overall application checklist, but I think they're specifically asking about the PSR equivalent. So I'll let Desiree tackle that.
Yes, every cycle since I think cycle 2, we've included the engineer's checklist. And that is the checklist that will be used to ensure that the project is the PSR equivalent.
And the application counts as long as like everything is included, that's kind of that they presented the PSR equivalent workshop, as long as all of that kind of detail is included, that's considered the PSR equivalent document.
Perfect. Thank you both. We got a comment from Francie just stating that these webinars are really helpful. So thanks, Francie. Thanks for tuning in. See if anything else comes in. Not seeing anything else. Thanks, Erin.
Before everybody signs off, I just wanted to say that now that so this was the last central workshop, so we're wrapping up engagement basically for this cycle. Still doing in-person site visits and some virtual site visits, but then the next big effort before we start evaluations is recruiting evaluators and training evaluators. So if any of you are interested in being evaluators, please let us know. We always need people, and it's really helpful for you to learn more about the program.
Yes, please. We could always use more evaluators. We'll be sending out an email about evaluator recruitment soon to our email list. But you can always, if like it's something like you're thinking about now, you can always email any of us and let us know that you're interested, and we'll get you on kind of our preliminary list of people who might be interested in evaluating.
We got one final question from Eileen asking, wondering about the project scope of work and percent of design completion that is needed to apply. For example, number of improvements at specific corners might change slightly by the time funds are awarded.
That's a Desiree question. Oh, she raised her hand.
Yep. Desiree, go ahead.
We don't have like a specific percent completion of design that's required. We just require that the project be a PSR equivalent. So, you know, check out the PSR equivalent workshop that we provided back in, what was it, December, I believe?
December
And
5th.
yeah, and of course, like I mentioned before, the engineer's checklist. And we do understand that changes happen throughout the project. And so if your project is awarded and you have any changes that are required, then please reach out to Caltrans district staff or headquarters staff, and we can kind of walk you through what that process looks like. You know, at most it can lead to some type of scope change. So yeah, just please, if you have any changes, make sure that you make us aware of those changes.
Thanks, Desiree.
Right. Do you want to go through action items, Alika?
Sure.
And then we can see if any other questions come in while you're going through those.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so I'll go through the action items. If there's something that I missed, feel free to let me know on this workshop. And if not, you can also email me. These action items will also be posted on the Commission's ATP website. So for the first one, I have for the new safety sub-question to add either in the application or scoring rubric as examples, to add surrounding land use types, roadway classifications, connecting facility types, the number, frequency, type, and traffic controls at intersections, including driveways. So thank you everyone for sharing those examples. And then the final action item we have is to provide an example for the leveraging letter of commitment.
Thanks, Alika.
Yeah, no problem.
I think any other questions came in?
Nope. Not seeing any.
All right, well, I think we can wrap it up for the day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. It's been a long, I don't even know how long it's been. It's been like over 6 months, I think. It's been a long time that we've been developing, I guess it's almost 6 months that we've been developing our guidelines and everything. And so thanks to everyone all of you and for participating and giving us all of your feedback and input. We really appreciate it. We couldn't do it without you guys. And that's it for today, unless people have other dire questions, and we'll hang around for like a few more seconds. But thanks, everyone.
Looks like we're just getting a lot of thank yous, so we can probably end early.
Great. All right. Have a good day.